that's the revenge. When you grow, when you do that, you grow out of them. You are no longer hooverable. The euphoric recall sort of dissipates. The distorted memories start to become more accurate. You stop gaslighting yourself. So their manipulations and their BS start to look like amateur hour. Today's proverb: before you embark on a journey of revenge, dig 2 graves. Now, this proverb is a Confucian saying from Confucius. What does it mean for narcissism? I'm sure some of you have already guessed. It's an interesting one because it takes us to this issue of justice. And I understand how much survivors of narcissistic abuse want justice and vindication, something to help them feel whole after the narcissistic relationship. I really, really get it. And people may spend years in the quest for justice, ruminating about it, wanting to see the narcissistic person fall, fail, and get theirs. They get lost in the fantasy of the day the narcissist gets found out or are publicly shamed. And believe you me, I get it. But let's go back to this proverb. So you go and you seek out revenge. Spiritually and psychologically, if you do that, you're going to kind of go down too. You may think, well, the damned narcissists are the most vindictive ones of all. Aren't they supposed to dig 2 graves as well? They actually need to dig an entire cemetery for all of the souls they harm. But you don't want to be like them. Their ground game of vindictiveness and revenge is part of their need for domination. It's the only way they can feel safe, to feel as though they have destroyed their opponent. And in their world, you are either for them or against them. There's really nothing in the middle. Now, healing from narcissistic abuse is no joke. It takes a long time, and this issue of survivors wanting revenge and vindication is a big stumbling block. Many people say, I would be okay if I knew that they were going down, if I knew they would lose their power or lose their job or their new relationship that they entered immediately failed. I want the world to know how terrible they are. So you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to put up anonymous posts or put stuff out on social media or make them look bad in their professional community or ruin their reputation or post our texts online so people know that this is a liar, a cheater, or thief. And let me tell you this, when you do that, you might as well grab that shovel and start digging that second grave. You're thinking, why, Dr. Ramani, why? Because when we want to put the best of ourselves, our energy, into the revenge of it all we're doing is absorbing the toxicity of these relationships into us. We are now behaving like them, and really it changes us, impacts us, and I really believe that a part of us dies. We then start living with the bad feeling of doing a bad thing, even if we might feel vindicated for a minute. And it may literally come back and bite you. The narcissist, as they do, may come after you for defamation. You may lose a job for misusing social media. You may even lose support from people who may have seen, they agreed that the narcissistic person did wrong by you, but they may not agree with how you're handling it. Many, many people feel that being around a narcissist long enough sort of changes our emotional DNA, makes us less empathic, more disconnected, less trusting, more cynical, angrier, and more vindictive. I don't think it's a permanent change, but I think it impacts us. Now, this may be sort of hard to recognize, but I really do believe that the revenge for them is really that they're stuck being them. They have a shallow, superficial life characterized by no depth, no intimacy, no empathy. Yeah, it does suck to go on social media and seeing them posting about living what seems to be their best life, but it's just not true. It's a superficial life, but they are just better at spinning it than the rest of us. Yes, they will move into a new relationship. No, that new person will not get a better version of them. And no, they will not live happily ever after. They will live shallowly ever after, unempathically ever after, superficially ever after, emptily ever after, but happily ever after? No. I know the big question for many people is, do they ever get justice? I don't know. It depends on what you think justice is. Goodness knows that I do get my schadenfreude glee when I watch narcissistic people go down. It doesn't happen a lot because narcissists are so enabled, but it does happen. They may not even go down in a blaze of glory, but it may be that everyone slowly starts distancing from them so they no longer get narcissistic supply, that they've lost their power in the world, that the narcissistic person wasn't able to outmarch the inevitability of aging, that their next partner and next partner and their next partner walked away from them too. That sure, they left the job with a severance package, but they lost the power they had. I think the justice people want is that the narcissistic people one day would take stock of all the people they hurt. Don't hold out for that. You can waste a lifetime waiting for that apology, and then on top of that, you've lost all that time waiting. All that time, and that's one more harm of the narcissistic abuse. Your growth and living more authentically, more connectedly, that strangely is its own form of revenge. And that doesn't involve you getting in the mud with them, and then there's no need for that second grave. But I get it. For a lot of people, they think I would feel so much more whole if I could just get a crack at them, get my revenge on them, really, really stick it to them. And I know for a lot of people, they feel like if I could do that, I would feel better. I'm here to tell you, having worked with so many people, it actually doesn't work. Confucius said it thousands of years ago. If you're going to embark on that journey of revenge, dig those two graves. You have been through too much in a narcissistic relationship just to live in the shadows of playing the vindictive ground game that the narcissistic person is so much better at. To live in that insecure place, to live in that uncomfortable place. The greatest thing you can do is walk out of one of these relationships with your head held high and with grace. Inside, you may be exhausted. Inside, you may think, please, I want them to go down. And maybe they will. But my hope is that whether they go down or not, one day you get to that point of indifference.
Let's try this proverb on today. If you can't beat 'em, join 'em. Ooh, this isn't a good one. And like I said, in the proverb series, we see some of these proverbs are very like, wow, empowering, boy, ancient Greek people understood a lot about narcissism. And then sometimes they're this kind of thing where you're like, ooh, this is not good for us. So let's take this one apart. Now, interestingly, if you can't beat 'em, join 'em is a phrase that actually had its origins in political grandstanding, which sounds about right. And it first appeared in the Atlantic magazine back in the 1930s. So, in the world of narcissism, all I can say is please completely ignore this proverb and please do not do what this proverb says. Please don't do it. Once, several years ago, I was holding an office hour after a night class, and I remember being particularly tired on that evening. As part of that content area in that class, I'd done a short lecture on narcissism. A student came to my office hour. He was actually a business major and was taking my psychology class as an elective. He had listened to the lecture and he said, "Hey, Doc, this narcissism thing, if I could figure it out, I would actually be killing it at my marketing job. Doctor, can you teach me how to do this?" I gave a tired chuckle and I said, "Yeah, no. I will not school you in the dark arts of how to be a narcissist." I'm not convinced I could have taught him. I think by the time you're his age, the ship had already sailed. But his point was well taken. Sadly, if we could learn some of these techniques, lose our empathy, be more entitled, be grandiose, be really egocentric, we would likely make much more money, be much more advantaged in our jobs and businesses, and be more sort of successful according to societal standards. We probably also have more time on our hands. Narcissism is in fact an instruction manual for how to get ahead in business. Now, if you followed this instruction manual, you would, of course, lose friends and hurt and offend people who matter to you and get into some fights and model some really bad behavior for your kids. But you would, as this student clearly hoped, likely sell more things to people who don't need them and get your needs met ahead of everyone else's. So in that way, at least for that student's goals, it would achieve what he wanted. So many people consistently exhausted by watching the bad folks win, watching them get elected to public office, watching them do really bad things and still get multi-million dollar buyouts and settlements, and watch them never get punished for their transgressions or their crimes, wonder, am I the sucker? Should I be getting on this bandwagon and just do me and do what I need to do and take my half out of the middle and not worry about other people? The answer to that question, both from a societal standpoint and from the point of your mental health, is no. Let's start with society and let's just get that out of the way. The rules of engagement in our world have been pulling for more and more narcissism every day. Social media, reality TV, business monopolies, runaway billionaires, massive income inequity. The more egocentric, entitled, and validation-seeking you are, the more resources you will have. Lots of people in our world can't afford homes, they can't afford school tuitions, they can't afford health care, and the only way to feel safe in the world for lots of families is to have more money. And this march towards, well, I can't beat them, this march towards joining them instead of trying to beat them is resulting in more and more problems in the world. Every week, I have more clients saying to me, is it me or is the world more toxic? Now that's an easy question. The world is more toxic. I understand the survivalism that may incentivize narcissism. But the fact of the matter is, it's bad for all of us. The other day, about a week or two or so ago, I ran into a really kind person who was working in a business. It's interesting. Back in the day, I would only notice the nasty people. Now, it's the really nice ones who make a strong impression on me because they feel so rare. The scales have tipped. But for a minute, so let's screw society, right? Let's focus on you. It's not good for your health to be narcissistic. I don't want you to join them. It means being a chronic malcontent, feeling like everyone is out to get you, to feel constantly empty, to feel like you're always under siege, to not care about others. To not care about others means that you miss the poetry of human relationships. Narcissistic people view kind people as suckers and devalue any show of human goodness. It means losing one of the most important contributors to our mental health. To be narcissistic means losing that. It means losing other people who we care about and who care about us. The research has shown consistently that social support is one of the most important pillars of mental health. Well, no empathy, no support. It doesn't feel good to walk through the world feeling inadequate and insecure and persecuted and having to cover that up by telling everyone, you're so great. It's a lot easier just to know you're good without having to talk about it all the time and not feeling that you need to prove it, and to enjoy the simple pleasure of a reciprocal and loving friendship or relationship. Because ultimately, those are the folks that live long and healthy lives. It is easy, after you are harmed by a narcissistic person, to believe that the best path forward is to go to the dark side and stop caring and taking your half out of the middle. It's not good for you. You can't beat them, at least not at their own game. But you can cut off the narcissistic supply. You can stop engaging. You can stop defending and explaining. You can hold on to your reality and take away the power of their gaslighting. When you stop engaging, you actually do beat them. You will never out superficial or out grandiose or out arrogant or out callous or out control them. But you can take away your supply. And then you don't have to join them. You can gently walk away, let them figure it out, and just keep on keeping on as a good, compassionate, and respectful person. Narcissism is a short game, short wins and street fights. Empathy is a long game. It's the lifetime back and forth of loving human relationships and self-reflection. It's the dividends of seeing a friend after 10 years and picking up where you left off, because you've always been there for each other. It's not living in the exhausted state of worrying who's out to get you. It's happily giving of your time because you simply care about someone. It's easier to beat them than you think, but promise me you will never join them. That may be a nice, sleazy political stratagem, but it is definitely not the stuff of a life well lived.
So have you ever had this feeling? I really want to get some kind of revenge on the narcissist. Does that make me a narcissist? So welcome back to this YouTube channel on narcissism. Let's unpack that question, because a lot of people struggle with this, right? The syllogism is that if narcissistic people are vindictive, and I'm feeling vindictive or even thinking vindictive thoughts about the narcissistic relationship in my life, does that make me a narcissist? Again, super interesting conundrum, because I had some conversations about this. I did a little bit of research. I've watched some people struggle with this very issue. Had an insightful conversation again with Terry Real, who told me some thoughts that his wife, Belinda, who's also a therapist, shared with him. And the insight that came out of that conversation was actually really spot on. And I'm hoping that some of this will help you manage some of the negative feelings you have when you do feel vindictive. Okay? So if you are in a narcissistic relationship, now especially if the relationship ends and then the narcissist is the one who ends it, I can guarantee that you're going to have obsessive thoughts of vindictiveness. Plan on it. And this will be 1,000 times more compelling if they left you for someone else. Now, most pointedly, if it's a romantic relationship, you may ruminate about their new relationship failing, or who is this new person, and you might even have this fantasy about their relationship failing or something bad happening to your ex. These are thoughts, and they're thoughts you can't get out of your head. You may ruminate about things about like the narcissistic person in your life, they lose their job or they're publicly shamed. If it's a workplace situation or a business associate and the thing falls apart, you may ruminate about them failing or having to, face the IRS or something. You dream of the day that they're arrested or that they go bankrupt. The challenge is that many survivors of narcissistic abuse are really empathic people. So you all struggle with having such overwhelming vindictive feelings. So I've had people say to me, I know, I'm such an evil person, but I would love it if someone stole his motorcycle. I'm like, well, you got to up your definition on evil, right? And then survivors will say, God, I'm not the same kind of vindictive as a narcissist, am I? I'd actually argue that these are different flavors of vindictiveness. And this is where that insight from that conversation and looking into the family systems literature gives us some thoughts. Narcissistic vindictiveness is domination-oriented. It's a way for them to show the other person or people or the world at large who's boss, to put fear in other people, to exercise a sense of menace, like you better watch your back, or I'm lawyering up, or I know everyone in this town, don't you? Psh, you won't ever be able to go anywhere again, that kind of thing. It's all an extension of power and control. The narcissists maintain the grandiose idea that nobody can cross them and get away with it. They get an almost sadistic glee from the idea of punishing someone, and they defend against their narcissistic fragility and their vulnerability through being vindictive. But another function of vindictiveness is an attempt to be heard. And this is especially true for people who have experienced emotional abuse or narcissistic abuse or simply a lack of empathy or just neglect in relationships. This function of vindictiveness can happen whether the relationship with the narcissist is over or not. In a narcissistic relationship, you are not seen or heard unless they need you for something or you do something that rocks their world and gets their notice, and that can include vindictiveness. The vindictiveness, in whatever form it takes, it becomes a way for a person in a narcissistic relationship to be seen or heard because now you're speaking their language. Their language doesn't include empathy or compassion or kindness or goodness, but vindictiveness, yeah, that's a language they know. Sometimes that vindictive action by you is the first time in a long time that the narcissistic person may drop what they're doing and look up long enough to notice what it is you're doing. And then, of course, when they recognize that it's vindictive, they completely lose their minds and come back at you with double the fierceness and revenge. But they will notice. And the hypothesis is then that if you take on the vindictiveness, basically that narcissistic posturing, that you learn, that's what's getting me heard. But that vindictiveness in you, that feeling, it does something else. You're trying to tick those boxes of addressing injustice. Your vindictive gesture may not set it all right. It may not even set it a little right, but it may help. One of the biggest impediments to healing is the sense of injustice that these relationships evoke. They are unfair. Narcissistic people get away with so much. There are very few consequences for their behavior. They don't care about hurting other people. They're often rewarded by society, and you are left holding the bag. Their toxic behavior, although it is devastating your life, is not against the law per se in many cases, so there are often few legal remedies. The narcissists also seem to live forever, and everyone else is getting sick from the stress-induced health conditions that they get from having to deal with them. And then there's another even more subtle point. When people go through narcissistic abuse, they often find they are not able to get through to other people, to fully have other people understand what they've been through, right? They will tell, if you're a survivor, you will recall people minimizing your experience of narcissistic abuse. People just have different styles, right? And sometimes, and this may not even be vindictive, but some survivors will almost take a little bit of relief when a person who didn't believe you is facing or is about to face a narcissistically abusive situation. Not because you want them to suffer, but because now you think that maybe they'll get it. Survivors can feel almost desperate to have the people around them get it. And they recognize that sometimes almost wishing a bad circumstance on someone is the only way they will get it. So the idea of feeling or even behaving vindictively as a way, even if this relationship is ostensibly over, to finally be heard may be part of the vindictive process that many survivors experience. You know damn well I am not a fan of vindictive behavior. I don't think it's good for you. But I am the first one to experience a slight bit of justice when I see a narcissistic person finally get their due. I am just never going to be a believer of someone initiating that vindictive set of dominoes and making them topple all the way down. I encourage people to take a path of patience, and that the true revenge is that the narcissist has to be the narcissist forever, and you at least have a shot at a genuine and compassionate life. But for folks who are hurting now, who aren't being heard now, that long-term play, it doesn't feel very satisfying. The challenge is that many survivors of narcissistic abuse, people who are good people, who do have empathy, vindictiveness is actually really not in your nature. So to even be thinking that way is foreign to you and can often result in a sense of almost self-punishment because now you see yourself as the bad one. I personally see you as the human one. And in this video, want to humanize where those vindictive feelings are coming from. There are so many things that are infuriating about a narcissistic relationship. But foremost is that nothing you do gets you seen or heard in the relationship. And that is an awful feeling. You may feel an escalation in yourself, especially if things that are happening in the relationship feel increasingly unjust, or if the relationship ends or you are betrayed. The vindictiveness, whether through thoughts or actions, may serve to create a sense of justice for you, even though it's hard to get, or just to feel heard. However, while I understand the functionality of it, it gets complicated. You want to be heard, you want justice, I get all of that. The fallout is the bad feeling it leaves in you. Be aware of that. And finally, be very careful. Vindictive behavior carries risks. It can put you in legal peril, and that can include running afoul of criminal laws, slander, defamation, libel, or because the narcissist is simply more litigious and vindictive than you, could also end up costing you tons of money in legal fees. So your vindictiveness in the face, or your feelings of vindictiveness in the face of a narcissist are not abnormal. It can all be all-encompassing and preoccupying, and while it's normal for a while, over time, these feelings do harm you. It pulls you out of your life, and the narcissist is still occupying a lot of space in your head. Talking these feelings out in therapy, engaging in healing work, recognizing that all of these thoughts are normal in light of what you've been through, but also pulling yourself back and avoiding acting on it and slowly taking your life back, that right there is the money shot. The new person in their lives, so if your narcissist left you and to go to someone else, that new person is now stuck with them. There was no winning, but it takes a minute to get there. You will get there. But I have to say, when I've observed people say, I'm not listening to you. I've had friends say, Ramani, and they've been actually very unkind. Like, you can take your self-righteous prattling and go to hell. I am going to get revenge on this person. But when they finally do, they actually feel terrible. They feel sick. It doesn't feel good. I've had people I work with and clinically and whatnot saying, and they roll their eyes at me and say, really? Like, seriously? Have you not been through this? I have. And then they will do it. They'll do what they're going to do. And what happens when they talk about it? I kind of wish I didn't do that. The fantasy is where you get stuck. Like, I will feel better. You think it'll help you feel whole. Every so often we get the miracle where there is the vindictiveness happen, like the juicy thing where the new person almost right away leaves them for someone new, something like that. Like, just something that looks bad and makes them look bad. It's great when it happens. It often doesn't, but anything you could do can often make it worse for you. And then instead of focusing on your healing, you may be dealing with the fallout of this. The vindictive thoughts in your head, normal. You're not a bad person. By acting on it, though, you could end up doing more harm to you than really rocking their world very much at all. And anytime someone does, so often afterwards they'll say, if anything, the satisfaction was short-lived.
We're going to take on a proverb many of you have heard. Revenge is a dish best served cold. And before I get to that, I'm going to give you that reminder. We're coming up. It's January, getting into our healing program. Great time to start it. I'm not a big fan of New Year's resolutions, but I am a big fan of, I think in a new year, we do take on a new perspective. Go down, take a look at those, the video description. You'll see a link. You get more information. Would love to have you join us right from the beginning. But let's go back to these proverbs. Let's talk about this idea that revenge is a dish best served cold. Many of you have heard this proverb. It's one that's been around for a long time. And as you know, I love me my proverbs. It's actually getting so fun to do this series because I love hearing these proverbs all of you are sending in. Please keep sending them. Now let's talk about this one though. The sourcing on this proverb is around the 1800s from the French. Perhaps it's from the novel Dangerous Liaisons. I cannot speak French, so I'm not even going to try to pronounce any of this in French. But there are some riffs on this proverb that come from Shakespeare and other writers over time, probably because in a way it's true. Now, what does it mean that revenge is a dish best served cold? It's a way of saying that reactive revenge in the moment, meh, that's basic revenge. This proverb suggests that revenge is best meant to be something that is deliberated over and delivered at a moment, perhaps when enough time has passed that the other person does not suspect it, and with an intentional planfulness that can result in that revenge, as it were, having a real impact. Now, this is a tricky proverb when it comes to narcissistic abuse. We know that narcissistic people are vindictive, it's in their DNA, but they often tend to be quite reactive in their vindictiveness. They want to bring you down right away, they want to harm you and smear campaign you quickly. By definition, narcissistic folks have a real inability to delay gratification or revenge, and instead, they tend to seek their revenge out swiftly and sometimes quite sloppily. Now, revenge is a loaded term. Overall, it's not good for us. Focusing on revenge, as I've said, can often leave people ruminating and in their heads. The more you remain focused on getting revenge on the narcissist, the more you are giving them the valuable real estate in your head. And then you sort of remain stuck in the relationship. But if we can find a different word, different than revenge, there's actually some applicability of this proverb to healing from narcissistic abuse. Instead of saying that revenge is a dish best served cold, we can recognize that your success, your health, your excellence, your happiness, frankly, are actually quite strangely revenge. And so that means that the best way to stick it to the narcissist, as it were, is you getting your house in order, to not ruminate over them and not continue to engage with them. Too many people fight the wrong revenge fight with the narcissist. They focus on bad things happening to the narcissist, or a public shaming, or the fantasy of the person they cheated with breaking up with them, or them losing their business or their money or reputation or something that brings them down. That's the wrong play. Revenge is you doing you. Now, will the narcissist notice or care if you are getting your life together? Who the hell knows? You aren't getting it together to exact revenge, but rather to save yourself. In most cases, probably not. They won't notice. But sadly, they tend to have a I want to destroy your happiness radar. And if they sense your life is on the upswing, they will attempt to harm it, just because they believe revenge is a dish best served hot. But by and large, your small victories aren't that interesting to them. The revenge, as it were, is really that you aren't living as a prisoner to them, thinking about them, controlled by them, trying to outplay them or outwit them, but rather getting out and disengaging. This proverb actually fits in quite well with the series that we're doing right now on narcissistic victories. That entire series is basically about cold revenge without it being about revenge, because that is the tricky part of all of this, turning the focus off of revenge and onto growth. Narcissistic abuse can rob us of a growth mindset. People experiencing narcissistic abuse are so focused on survival that they lose sight of growing beyond this relationship and stretching their wings. The narcissistic person will take your limiting beliefs about yourself and magnify them. These relationships leave us feeling shorter, not taller, so we tend to forget about growth. Because that's the revenge. When you grow, when you do that, you grow out of them. You are no longer hooverable. The euphoric recall sort of dissipates. The distorted memories start to become more accurate. You stop gaslighting yourself. So their manipulations and their BS start to look like amateur hour. But growth takes time. It's different for everyone. But it's not as simple as removing the narcissistic person from your life and voila, you're better. It's a process of ungaslighting, of addressing core wounds, of shifting core beliefs, of having a healthier schema about yourself, about cherishing your own reality, about learning to validate yourself. None of that happens overnight. It takes a while, sometimes months, sometimes years. There's no clock on this. And that process of growth, that's the revenge. You start to become more immune to all of this. And then one day, perhaps they try to hoover you, or you run into them, or whatever happens, and you grew. And you may be a little triggered when you see them, but you're okay. That's the revenge that is served cold. And the biggest day of all is when you wake up one day and recognize that the day before, you really didn't think about them at all. So while revenge may not be the right word, revenge in a narcissistic relationship is really about you no longer being vulnerable to their manipulations. And when that happens, it feels great. Revenge or no revenge. So let's not call it revenge. Let's call it taking yourself back. Above all else, just take your time with it and serve it cold. Thanks again. As always, keep those proverbs coming in. They're delightful to read, but even more delightful to sit down with and say, how interesting this person thought this relates to narcissistic abuse, and sit with them a minute.
Okay, everyone, have you ever fantasized about getting revenge on a narcissist? I expect 100% yes on that. Drop it in the comments, just a yes or a no. Now, it has often been said that revenge is a dish best served cold. I would argue that revenge is also a dish that is best served in a way that is good for you and cold. Now, we often think of revenge as a bad thing, as a sort of cruel vindictiveness, which obviously is also a narcissistic person's ground game, right? To be vindictive. And maybe revenge is the wrong word to be using here. But I know that so many people following or their experiences of narcissistic abuse, while they are recovering and healing, at some level, they do feel, and all of us who are survivors of narcissistic abuse feel that karma or destiny or justice has let them down, has let us down, right? They feel that the narcissist has won, that they win, that they get to just move forward into their lives and their futures, and then they get to do this to another person, or even worse, God forbid they live happily ever after, right? While you are left wearing the battle scars. Well, I'm going to give you a bad and frankly a pathetic example, and then we can expand from there. Okay, this is a personal example, but it's a really bad example. But bear with me. When I was in 10th grade, my English teacher found as many ways as he could to tell me that I was a lousy writer, that I should not write, that I could not write, that I was basically a terrible English student. He was a pretty pompous guy, and it was actually really damaging feedback for me because it actually ended up pushing me in directions when I was in college and even beyond that, that were all based in this identity I had as somebody who could not write. And in latter years in my English classes, even in high school, I did well. I got A's even in other high school English classes. But he was so focused on breaking me down and reminding me that I was a terrible writer. And I was such a neurotic teenager that I couldn't focus on any of the good stuff. All I was able to do was focus on his mean-spirited feedback. What's interesting was I ended up even postponing applying to graduate school and pursuing my PhD by a few years, delaying it for a few years, because I was so convinced that because I'm a bad writer, I could never write a dissertation. That's honestly how much of an impact his mean feedback had, and I got to own it. Maybe I had to get a thicker skin, but it wasn't okay because I had a lot less power than him as a teacher. But over time, and in the face of other narcissistic or mean-spirited feedback I got right into adulthood, I got into a bit more of a revenge headspace. I thought, and this is terrible for me to own up to, but I said, I'm going to stick it to everyone who ever told me that I couldn't write or think clearly. I'm going to write a book. And then I guess the cherry on top was that I also got to write a book about narcissism. So I guess that was a bit of a 2-for-1, wasn't it? Now, I know this about myself. I do hold a grudge for too long, but I was still angry, again, well into adulthood. So I wrote one book, and then I wrote another, and then I wrote another, and I hope to keep going. Because when I write, I feel like I'm fighting against or fighting back against those internalized, invalidating voices in the head of that awkward 15-year-old girl I was sitting in the third row of that god-awful English class. My so-called act of revenge ended up in me writing books and dissertations and other written work that shaped my career. It taught me I can write. It's interesting. Years later, another narcissistic dude came up to me and told me, ugh, someone like you, you're never going to finish your dissertation by January. I will never forget this person's contemptuous laugh to this day. Once he said that, I worked 7 days a week for 3 months to get that dissertation in ahead of schedule and finish my PhD. Then after I finished it, I marched into his office where he looked up and he's like, Ramani, what do you want, Ramani? And I said, that's Dr. Ramani, bitch. Like, I needed to get that. Now, I got into a little trouble for that because I said bitch at work, which I wasn't supposed to do. But I'm telling you, this revenge against narcissism piece was really important to my healing. Now, for all survivors, an incredibly important moment of healing is when you push back on the invalidating voices that so many people internalize. The idea of, I'm not that smart, or I'm kind of anxious, or I'm so disorganized, or I'm not that attractive, or I can't write. And we live into those identities that the insecure narcissistic people in our world infected us with. So now, to you, I say, please drop a comment. What were some of the misperceptions that you had about yourself that came from your narcissistic relationship, regardless at what age it happened? So I guess when I use this word revenge, I guess I mean that instead of putting our time and our bandwidth into ruminating about and wondering about the narcissistic person or narcissistic people who did harm to us, and ruminating about what they did and what they said, what about proving them wrong? They told you you were clumsy, so you pursue a love of dance. They told you that you could never run a business or that you couldn't even add 2 numbers on a balance sheet. You start small and you build a business. They told you that you don't earn your keep, or that you are a mercenary, or that you're a gold digger. You support yourself financially. They told you you can't write. You write a few books. They told you that you're out of shape and old and past your prime. You train for a marathon or you climb a mountain. I gotta tell you, in this little head of mine, I've got my lifetime list of people with antagonistic personalities who are difficult and toxic, some of whom are quite narcissistic. It's just a bunch of initials I have listed on a little secret piece of paper. And when I need that kick in the gut to get me to keep working, keep fighting, keep thinking, maybe when I'm procrastinating or I feel listless, I look at that list of people who invalidated me in myriad ways, in creative ways. And it's just the kickstart that I need. Just when I see them like, oh, they didn't want you to succeed, I sit down and I start writing or creating or developing. Believe it or not, wanting to prove them wrong is my motivator. After breakups, we do often see people displaying their revenge bodies. And sure, I'm happy for people who decide to take ownership of themselves and feel attractive. But what I'm talking about today, this healing model of, again, for lack of a better word, revenge, it has nothing to do with hurting or slamming or insulting or defaming or invoking jealousy in another person. It's not about that. It's about you doing you, about you excelling, about you pursuing a dream, about you waking up and doing things that are meaningful to you. If that narcissistic person ends up getting jealous, take a little bit of tiny schadenfreude out of that. That's a little bonus. But don't let the narcissistic person's jealousy be the motivator. Be you. Getting motivated and doing things good for you be the motivator. Now, at some level, the narcissistic folks believe that all of us are crying into our coffee if we lose them and that we can't replace them. The funny thing to remember is this: you finally doing what you were told that you couldn't do, or finally doing work that is noticed, that is a revenge that is actually sort of a harmless weapon. Because the fact is, they don't care about us. They don't care about you. They don't care about me. They don't care about anyone. They don't care what you're doing. They don't care what you're not doing. They may get a little jealous, though, if you succeed at something that matters to them, or if you get status that they may want a part of. if they sense that you're kind of succeeding the way they kind of envy, they might try to hoover you. Don't fall for that. But in general, they don't care. They didn't notice when you were with them. They don't notice what matters to you when you are not with them. So this so-called revenge only benefits you. It takes all of that time around ruminating and the hurt and the angry, frustrated, self-blaming energy and turns it into something. That something could be small, it could be big, size doesn't matter. What matters is that you're doing it. And as you do it, this thing that they've motivated you to do, maybe just to show them that you're wrong about me, I want you to think and smile about how they would probably have made fun of you for doing this, or told you that it was a bad idea, or that you were wasting your time, or that you would fail, or they had contempt for what you were doing. Perhaps the revenge isn't even getting it done, but it's really all about the doing it. Listen, I'm not that young, so I'm pretty sure that my English teacher has passed on. If not, he is probably really, really old and would never remember me. Ironically, though, years ago, my 9th grade English teacher showed up to one of my book signings. Because we do have to remember that in the midst of the seas of narcissists around us, there were also the good people who did see us. Narcissistic abuse, or even just being repeatedly invalidated and surviving it, can be a catalyst for you to use to change you, to appreciate how quiet things can be when those invalidating words finally stop, and to make pursuing your goals and reinventing yourself an act of defiance. Because maybe that's a better word instead of revenge. What I'm talking about is an act of defiance. Rebellions aren't always bad. In fact, they're often quite good. And a rebellion where you defy the negativity and naysaying and invalidation and do something that matters to you, well, that's always going to be a win. So I hope you found this video helpful. And if it was, please give it a little thumbs up. And please also subscribe to this channel if you don't already. Just hit that button that says subscribe. I am so grateful to see this community growing. Thanks so much for tuning in. 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 So much.